Morning, everybody. Or afternoon.
Hello. So, we had not a lot of time to prepare, but we promised to have a battle.
Yeah, of course, as everybody's expecting, I will be the pro-regulation guy, and you will be the anarchist.
Yes. Yeah.
My starting point will be that politicians and regulators are right now in a state of anarchy, and they just do whatever they want against property rights, and Bitcoin will be the regulator that will force them back to respect property rights to an extent.
I think that's really a very good point. Thank you very much, Giacomo, for starting like that. But I think we have to differentiate between what is, like, which regulation we are talking about, right? I mean, it's one thing, and I talked about yesterday about MiCA, which is supervisory, and actually that's only regulating service providers, like if you provide custody services or if you provide an exchange, right? And I think that's a different story than like having, at least in my point of view, than you have like AML, KYC provisions, like this compliance rules, which is applicable for everything. And when we talk about travel rule, that they also think about that they want to do that from unhosted wallet to unhosted wallet. I think that's for me a completely different animal because that's like has a way broader application, because the first part, MiCA, is only for service providers, right? So if you do your stuff yourself, it's exempted, right? But if you use a service provider, then that's different, right? And I think I have some sympathy for that, right? Because we had a lot of bad cases. Is regulation the solution? To be very honest, we saw a lot of cases where it completely failed. Supervisory authorities failed, right? But I don't know what is the better solution to that short term, right?
The distinction, I think, makes sense, because in the first case, in the case of control, top-down control over society and social engineering using money as a leverage, like in social credit in China, stuff like that, or anti-money laundering, KYC laws all around America and Europe, I would be against for a matter of principle. While if we discuss regulation against fraud, basically, so how to prevent services from defrauding the users, from running away with the money or not respecting the terms, in that case, of course, I think that the regulation is just basically enforcing the actual contract, so I'm all in favor of that. But in that case, my opposition will probably be not in principle, but it will be practical. I think that a regulation which is applied erga omnes and ex ante is usually maybe effective in the short term, but it tends to be even counter-effective in the long term. For example, in order to avoid people from getting scammed by stock market frauds, like maybe in the 90s, now we have a strong restriction from entering the stock market, for example, in the US, but everywhere. So now, since the central banks are inflating the supply of money, and the only way to save for people is to invest, they are forced to become investors. If they cannot get to the normal stock market, they will flow elsewhere, and they will feel stuff like FTX and shitcoins and the crypto space. So in a way, we may think that regulation against rug pulls and against scams or Ponzi scheme is good, but what it creates is basically a financial exclusion that will push people into even more wild web, let's say. So it can be counterproductive. I dare to say that without the qualified investor rules or the SEC rules, many people that invested in shitcoins and Ponzi scheme will maybe just have invested in the normal stock market with some level of reasonable expectation of not losing money.
But this, I mean, first of all, I think, and like, let me just follow up with that. The stock market is not like one thing, right? You have a lot of different kind of financial instruments. It's not only equity where you are a shareholder of a company. There are like the structured products. And I don't think all of the stock market per se is a suitable instrument for the average Joe, right? And that brings me to the point, I know where you're coming from, right? You're basically saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're basically saying if we have a lot of protection in the beginning, people don't educate themselves, right? They don't burn themselves with smaller amounts when they start. So they don't get educated, they don't train themselves. And we all got burned, right? And that was a tough lesson, right? And then you educate yourself. But my question is, and I just want, do you really feel that we are able to educate everybody to make use of sound money nowadays in 2023? Like grandma and grandpa and like really everybody? It's not, for me, I mean, you're a very intelligent guy, you're into that space forever, right? For you, everything is very easy. But try to explain, like we do that every day, right? But try to explain the average Joe how to use it properly. It's tough, right? And the other guy is like, oh, I just download an app and I use a service provider and then I can get my first Bitcoin.
Yeah, I agree. For us, it's very, very difficult. For pain, is easier. Like pain is a better teacher than us. And for example, as you say, the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it helped us, the unregulated nature of Bitcoin during the first years helped us to learn. For example, empty GOX was a failure, just like bank failures, but it had a great advantage. Nobody bailed it out. Nobody bailed me out when I lost money there. So that's a good thing, because I did learn not to trust centralized exchange and custodians. And many people that are not maybe very quick, when they suffered during the anti-GOX crisis, they did learn. So of course, it's difficult. The best outcome would be to avoid pain, to prevent pain. Like we don't need everybody to get poisoned by berries in order to learn that they are poisonous. We can use culture to pass down the message, this berry is poisonous. You don't have to try it before you learn. But it's hard. It's hard especially because the feedback loop is not very fast, it's low. When you eat a poisonous berry, you feel it immediately. When you invest in a new wave of Ponzi scheme, you will learn it after maybe a couple of years of bull market, and then everything will crash. So you need time. But what I would say is that even if the this is a general argument about prohibition in general. It's like with alcohol, with drugs, with everything. If we try to shortcut the learning experience with violent prohibition, then the strong demand of the market, if it's there, it will just go elsewhere. It will just route around the prohibition, ending up even worse in this kind of speakeasies where they will find even worse offer. So maybe it's hard, but we have to go the hard path in order to be anti-fragile. The easy path is effective but fragile.
At a global scale and on the long run, right? I think that's a very good point, and I do agree. But it's a timing issue, and it's not for like. The problem is you still have users, as I said, very old people, right? If they invest their pension or the rest of their pension, right, and then they got wrecked, they don't have time to get that back, right? And we have social security in the middle of Europe. There's no problem, right? I mean, you anyway will survive. And when you learned your lesson with Mt. Gox, you were young, right? You had enough time to get back right on track. But some people just don't have that time. And another thing is, I mean, I had friends of mine who tried to convince me of a Ponzi scheme, literally, right? Basically saying we are issuing a shitcoin and that's our website, right? And he said whatever.com/VP admin, which was just basically a website. And I told him, guy, I mean, that's fraud. What you're trying is fraud. And he had a lot, he did not trust me. So it's very hard to convince these guys. And as you said, that takes time, right? So more people get actually scammed and screwed, and that's the problem, right? I think, and I don't know, I mean, do you really accept, or do you think it's the right thing to accept, in general and at a global scale, to say, okay, we just wait now, right? And everybody has to learn his lesson the hard way, right? And that takes now a little bit of time, and a lot of people will actually get these problems. Then just to say, let's regulate these intermediaries now, and that will have a cost. But what is the cost for Bitcoin adoption when you regulate only the intermediaries? Let's skip out the AML provisions for a second. You regulate only the intermediaries. So if I do provide custody services for your Bitcoin, and you pay me for that, right? I'm supervised by a third-party authority, right? Why is that so bad? Why do you think that is bad?
Well, first of all, I agree with you that we should not just wait for awareness to emerge. So it's not about waiting and do nothing. I want to do things. I want to be active and proactive. The point I make is who is acting on whose property. So I'm acting on my property, trying not to launch Ponzi schemes. It's hard in this sector, but I try every day. And I try to prevent my friends and family and the people listening to me from falling into Ponzi schemes. And I try to call out people launching Ponzi schemes. So I'm trying to do something active, but at the local level, the thing that I can reach, the thing that I can do directly. I know that it's imperfect. I know that it cannot reach everybody, cannot save everybody. It's very limited. But I think the counterpoint is that the alternative, so using central planning, is also limited. If we really had the alternative between local action, like reaching out to people we can save, and on the other hand, some kind of magical regulator that can do things right, maybe we would be tempted to use the latter. But the thing is that even the regulator will mess up. They will authorize, like the head of the SEC will hang out with the head of FTX. They will be best buddies, and people will feel legitimized into investing in FT coin or FT token or whatever, and then there will be a Ponzi scheme. I mean, regulators, the people that should be in charge of keeping people out of Ponzi scheme, you mentioned Social Security. They're basically running a giant Ponzi scheme. Social Security is a giant Ponzi scheme, which compared to crypto is like the real thing. So how can we trust a central planning that will have negative side effects in the long term to give us some magical shortcut in the short term if the same people will be anyway imperfect, corrupt, most of the time even unaware of the actual technology we're trying to discuss or the actual monetary dynamics that are in place. We are in Austria right now, but even politicians in Austria, they usually don't know their Austrian economics very well. So the point is that, thank you. That's I'm 1/4 Austrian, by the way, so I can be racist in that regard.
Yeah, I think that is another point. But in general, like the question really is for me that these kind of regulations, and that's a fact. I mean, we are now in 2023. We will have pan-European regulation, MiCA being in effect mid of next year, 2024, and then the end of next year for all of the crypto assets, how it is called in MiCA. So that is happening anyway, right? But I think, and that's my point, I think we should actually, and that's we can disagree. I'm more than happy to do that. I think for me, the only road we have is, and what is very likely to happen is that we will get regulation, and our point, and our industry has to educate the regulators to make it hopefully more sensible and more reasonable, right? Because it will happen anyways in the short run at least, right? And make them as a different question. But you're, like, let me ask you one thing. Are you against regulation? You're not against regulation because obviously regulation is a set of rules, right? And our protocol, like Bitcoin, is a set of rules. Like it's defining something and it's telling you what happens if you put something in, right? With regulation, it's actually similar, right? What you try to do is you say, look, if you do that, that will happen. It's not perfect, right? But it's very similar. So you're more against the idea of having central control and something is actually organized and you have like the censorship. Or what is the really thing you don't like about regulation?
I like natural law, so I like 3 basic principles that I think derive directly from logical laws that are: 1, appropriation. If you build something yourself, that's yours, and there's nobody else to touch or to steal or to take. 2nd is contracts. You can make contracts, stipulate contracts about your property, and you can give it away with contracts, and you should respect contracts. And if you breach contracts, you should be basically punished proportionally. And 3rd is the proportional punishment. If I take your stuff, you have the right to take it back with force. So that is basically regulation. And it seems very simple, but on the 2nd principle, the contract principle, you can build on top of that a lot of very complex and intricate, and that's actually how the entire civilization worked in common law in customary law for centuries. Like you have some basic principle and you can build up customary laws. What I'm against is fiat, what we could call fiat regulation. So the very recent, historically speaking, idea that one group of people can make up laws arbitrarily that will actually influence other people's property without the consideration of basic property rights. So the idea that a politician can decide your stuff is now mine because of, I don't know, whatever, you know, the aliens or the climate change. Now your stuff is mine because of COVID. You cannot use your property. You cannot use your body, your legs to move around and stuff like that. So I think that most of the regulator in the financial sector is basically fiat regulation, because the basic rules in the financial sectors are basically very clear. Do not steal money, respect your contract, or you will be punished according to the contract, which is, I mean, it's so boring that there would be basically no job for many people inside the European Union bureaucracy, right?
But as we all know, there is a lot of work, right? And there is a lot of jobs, not only for the Parliament and the guys at the European Union and Commission, but when you look at basically Principle 2, and you said it, I listened to you very closely, you said if someone breaks a contract, right, you can go after him, right? But are you all also against like the court system, how it is organized, and you have like the national prosecutor if something is criminal, and then, because you need, like, how would you organize enforcement? I think we are on the same page there. We need that, right? I'm trying to identify actually the area where we really disagree, right?
Yeah, so now I can answer to you going a little bit philosophical and historical. So later on I will try to go back to realism, political realism. My favorite way to organize courts would be the thing they had during the Middle Ages in Europe, and they still kind of have it somewhere around Europe. There was a lex mercatoria, where people could set up private courts managing contracts and insurance between
arbitration
courts.
Is the modern way of doing that.
It's, well, to give you a modern example, international law, I think it's a good example of anarchist law system. There is no single government of the planet that will enforce the international law. It's basically based on two principles. It's sovereignty, like national sovereignty, which is the equivalent on a personal level to your property borders. And the second is treaties, respect of treaties, which is basically respect of contracts. And then there is, you can react and defend yourself if you get attacked. So it's the same principle that right now, luckily, we don't have a world government yet, but they're working on that. And so there is no fiat government of the international relationship. It's all anarchist in a way. And I think that worked very well for private individuals and organizations for most of the Christian civilization in Europe, and also outside Europe, like in Xir law in Somali, Brihol law in Ireland, the thing in Iceland. So there are many historical examples. But even right now, but now let's get back to realpolitik. I don't think that feudal anarchism is practical, politically speaking, right now in Europe. It's not really very fashionable. So I agree that we will have bad laws, and we can try to lobby in order to reduce the damage of these laws. For example, if they try to regulate services, maybe we can try, but I'm skeptical on the result, but we can try to save multi-sig services. For example, Blockstream Green is a great wallet that provides a second key to sign your transaction. That's not a custodial, because they cannot take the money, and they cannot even freeze the money forever because you have a locked time. So this is a service that cannot run away with your money. Will that require KYC AML, or even travel rule, or even MiCA rules? I think that would be very bad for this kind of smart services that stay in between, right?
What I can tell you is the only way how we can do that is try to educate the decision makers, and that's I mean, they are already, I mean, that depends on the region you're looking globally, right? There are regulators and parliaments which are way more educated than a lot of others. That's one part. And look at the proof of work ban, which was in the parliament, right? We were very close to get a proof of work ban in Europe. That was like, I was really shocked when I heard that's now on the agenda, right? So, but we were able to talk to everybody, right, and convince everybody that that's the wrong approach, right? So you can influence that process, but I think we just have to do that continuously, because laws, and that's another fact, right? They will never stop, right? There will be more and more and more and more laws all the time, right? So we have to do that all the time and see and educate, because then you can have that discussion. Does it really trigger custodial requirements when you have a multisig and you basically just add one part of the key? Right? No. Why should it, right? But there you have to have a level of understanding of the technology that you can have that educated discussion with the regulator. And if you have that, then normally, that's my experience, they listen and they understand, and then, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, you get good outcomes, right? But that takes time, right? And it's a lot of work, right? But I think we should also do that and not only try to educate every person individually, we should also, because it's just a matter of fact, or I don't know if you agree with that, but I think there is no way that we will live in a world short and midterm without regulation. To change that system takes a long time, right? I don't know if you agree with that. Do you think it's like manageable in 20 years? I don't see that happen.
Well, the point is that if we were just building the alternative and the mainstream setting was not crumbling down, we would probably take more than that. Like email replaced paper mail during over 40 years, let's say. People were printing emails at the beginning. But
they still do. Some lawyers still do. Exactly. Every email.
So not even finished, right? But why email was affirming itself as an alternative, the postal offices were not crumbling down. They were still there, kind of working. Bitcoin may be affirming itself as an alternative while the old system may face a very serious and existential crisis. If that's the case, we may not have had 20 years in front of us, but we don't know. This is just future. What I can tell you is that I agree that the strategy you're proposing to engage, to lobby, to try to compromise is a strategy that can be effective, especially in the short term, to limit the damage, to control the damage. But I think that the strategy works better in conjoint with another strategy, which is the more aggressive strategy. It's basically the very old good cop, bad cop strategy. Like, if we are in a room with the criminal, which is the regulator in this case, you can be the good cop, I can be the bad cop, and it's mutually beneficial in a way, because when you negotiate, it's better for you to have some kind of counter force that, so if they don't accept your middle ground, what then? Do they just win, or there is some force that they cannot control? So having crazy people like me that will just threaten to go fully black market and to just take all the wallets out on Tor, it's good for the middle guy. And the other way around, because if I am the hardliner, I can be very intellectually consistent, but then I may go to jail and I will need you. So we can help each other out, basically. Good cop and bad cop.
That's a good idea, actually. No, but that makes a lot of sense. And that's actually, I think, also one of these natural rules. If you don't have someone who is challenging you, you just, like, you don't evolve anymore, right? If everybody just tells you, yeah, I totally agree, this is boring. That's actually the same.
It's also the Overton window, you know, in the debate. Maybe you get listened by the regulator with the reasonable middle ground proposal. Yeah. But then if there is no extreme principle proposal on the other side, the Overton window, the discussion will shift between you and the hardliner on the other extreme. So we need the compensation in the public discourse. Yeah. So maybe we have to separate venues. Like here, we can have some kind of integration of the strategies, but when you talk with the European Council, maybe your approach is better because I will just get arrested immediately. And when we talk with newspapers or elsewhere, or when we prepare plans B, like what if they ban Bitcoin wallets? I don't like self-hosted wallets. Self-hosted wallets is like unmasked face. I mean, that's just a normal face. You have to put something on top, but it's just normal wallet. Bitcoin wallets can be put out of law. If that's the case, we have to understand how to make usable, even for average person, wallets that cannot be stopped using Tor and using maybe APK on Android instead of the app stores and stuff like that.
I think
Oh, thank
No, that worth an applause. Come on, please. We're running out of time. It's really a pity. But I think, and that's the interesting thing, right? We align in the big vision, right? And I think that's my takeaway for today. We do need each other, right? And it makes sense to work on both strategies, right? To work on the long-term strategy, but to work on the other strategy as well.
Agreed. So we reach agreement.
No, we don't have to be. We promised that we have a good, interesting talk with not only agreeing with each other.
Okay, so let's.
It's a partly agreement. Thank you.
So we cannot reveal the good cop, bad cop strategy too soon. So let's forget everything.
Okay, let's keep that between us.
Secret.
Secret.
Thank you.